Good evening and welcome to Carte Blanche, the show where candid conversations about our great city and state take center stage. I'm your host, Leila Loiso, and tonight I am thrilled to receive the fairy godmother of our city's skyline, someone who spent a whopping 35 years as the director of the Division of Land Use at the New York City Council, helping literally hundreds of council members navigate the complicated urban planning process. Her illustrious career in public service was continued as she was appointed chair of the Charter Revision Commission in 2018. Today, she continues to serve our great city as a commissioner of the City Planning Commission. Tonight, we welcome Gail Benjamin to Carte Blanche. Every other week, one can listen to Gail's incredibly pointed questions at the City Planning Commission hearings. Sharper than a physician's scalpel, Gail slices through the intricacies of urban planning with surgical precision. Stay with us as we give Gail Benjamin carte blanche to talk about the vision, the challenges, and the future of New York City's urban landscape. Gail, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Leila. It's really delightful to be here.
I am thrilled. So you have had a really illustrious career that actually started with the Board of Estimates, even before you were with the City Council, working as their director of the Land Use Division. Tell us a little bit about that.
When I started working for the city, I was working for the controller, then Jay Golden, and I represented him at the Board of Estimate, where I got my first and most complete education about how the city works. In those days, the Board of Estimate was the powerful organization, and the City Council was its little sister. The Board of Estimate did everything from land use to contracts to other than low bids, and you really did get a complete sense of how the city operated, how the agencies did their work, and the work that was to be done. You also got to deal with the public. And remember, this was in the 70s, so it was before cell phones. Representing someone meant going to a public phone and trying to catch up with them wherever they were. The mayor at that point, Edward Koch, and the council president, Carol Bellamy, and the controller each had 2 votes on the Board of Estimate, and each one of the 5 borough presidents had 1 vote. So when the citywide officials voted in concert, basically they could adopt the direction that they had agreed upon. And since those 3 were very progressive-minded, there were a lot of positive changes that came about from that coalition.
So you've had a really illustrious career as a public servant. Is that something that you always wanted to do?
Absolutely. When I was growing up, my parents, particularly my mother, were very involved in the civil rights movement. My mother was the head of the NAACP in Queens. My father was one of the officers who did security at the March on Washington. And for me, growing up, I saw that government was the place that made change happen. And I found that really exciting, necessary, and I was passionately committed to trying to find a career that would allow me to be a part of that. And I have. I have to say, while government has changed somewhat, that being in government, being in these positions, has allowed me to feel that I'm helping to make change, both for my generation and generations to come.
So you've had this amazing career that spans, really many administrations. Where are we today? Are we making change in politics and in administrations?
I think it's much harder now to make change, and I think that change is not viewed positively by very many, which makes it even harder. I think that the changes in the body politic that led to term limits, I personally don't believe that term limits has been a useful or a positive thing for the city.
Why is that?
I think in part because it leaves electeds in the role of always running for office. So once they get elected the first time, after a year and a half or two, when they're finally, no one knows what the job is when they get it. When they finally are learning what the job is, they're running for office again. Then they get elected the next time, and then they're looking around for where they're going next. Most of them do not see themselves fading back into the background. They want to stay involved somehow in the body politic. So they're looking around for a state senate seat, a state assembly seat, a congressional seat, or some other elected office.
Yeah.
And that means that it's much harder to be brave. Because you're thinking of your next audience and your next job.
It's interesting also that, you know, the big topic in New York City, you know, the topic that we end up, you know, being polarized about is really land use. You know, we are a very progressive city, and, you know, there's not too much conversation going on, you know, on other topics that may be, you know, raging in Florida or in Texas. Here in New York City, we don't have those. We talk about education and we talk about land use. I think those are
crime.
And crime,
right
and public safety, and public safety. Those are, you know, the super polarizing topics. And land use is like, you know, everybody has an opinion on land use. You know, they don't know it's called land use, but they know that the city ought to look a certain way, and they have very, very strong opinions. So what do you think the city should look like?
I don't think I have what the city should look like. I enjoy different parts of the city that look completely different. I enjoy the fact that you can walk a few blocks and see an entirely different city than the one that was right behind you. I enjoy the fact that change is possible in the city, physical change. I don't necessarily always enjoy the process of the physical change. But when you go back years later and you look at it, you realize that very often it hasn't destroyed the city. Very few things have that kind of power.
So there has been a number of major rezonings, upzonings, especially in Manhattan, that some argue have had really, you know, altering power, Hudson Yards being one of them. You were actually working with the city council at the time, and it was, what, years, decades, years for sure in the making. It was a really complicated, and in a way it's still ongoing.
Right.
And, you know, the phase 2 is still.
And the park is moving along, but not finished.
Not finished, and then, you know, the affordable housing that was promised has not yet been built, and a school was supposed to come in that has not yet come in, and the vacancy rate, depending on who you're asking, is alarming, possibly. So what do you make of these very, very large projects? Was it good? Was it bad? Was it ugly? And what is the role of a city in actually planning their land use?
I think planning is at best a hope. Because we really don't have any power to enforce or make people build what we've planned for. We don't know what is going to happen, and so one of the examples I would say in Hudson Yards, when we were planning Hudson Yards, there was an incredibly strong market for commercial. And there was an incredibly strong market for office space at a very high rate. So it seemed like a golden opportunity. And then, not only is the office space generally cyclical in New York City, But the pandemic came, which changed all the calculus or calculi that we had made in looking at these projects. And that is the fate of most really large projects, is that you have to expect the unexpected, and that over time, these large projects, as I'm sure you've seen on the community board, they come back time and time again. As circumstances change, they change the project, the plan, and that's not a bad thing. I don't think we want to be stuck and say, well, Hudson Yards, you have to build this office space and you have to keep it vacant even if nobody wants it, because that's what we said we would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually maybe there will come a time when it will be re-tenanted or tenanted in the first place, and until then you just have to eat it.
So just to bounce on what you just said, Gail, is there any room for actually mandating in the process of land use and zoning? Can we actually tell people what to do rather than suggesting or incentivizing?
I don't believe so. We are still a capitalist society here in the United States, and as such, private property in many ways is sacrosanct. After a long series of laws during the turn of the last century, and we can zone, and zoning has come into being for health, safety, and the police power. So that the beginning of zoning stemmed from noxious uses being separated from residential uses for the public health, for the public welfare. And the more we stray from that, the more difficult it is for it to legally be supported, which is why we end up trying to incent people to do a variety of things that we consider useful, whether it's opening new subway stairs or providing space for elevators down to the subway, or whether it's affordable housing.
So, in your opinion, whose responsibility is it for, let's say, a large residential project to provide enough school seats or hospital seats or senior activities or park and open space? Is it up to the city to pony up the expense? Is it up to the developers, given that, in the end, it is usually private projects? We're not talking about public housing here, but, when it is a private developer, whose responsibility is it?
Well, I think that the way the system works is that every piece of property, depending on its size and use, is supposed to pay taxes. And taxes at a certain rate. And those taxes go to support municipal functions like schools and hospitals and streets. Many cities have a separate taxing structure just for schools. But in the 80s, that became problematic because as communities got older, many people did not want to support the schools in the same way as they had previously, and they voted against increases in the school tax. Different municipalities and localities have tried different schemes of taxing. In California, they have the special districts. They have special districts for sewer and special districts for water and special districts for mosquito abatements, all to get around increasing the tax rate, which is a political hot potato. Here in the city, we have one tax for everything.
So everything is lumped up, and then it is
divvied up by this
to the budget to come
distribute.
to life.
That is correct.
So we're making it an incredibly political affair that actually has a lot of implications with land use and zoning, because...
And it's always a political affair, in my opinion, because the decisions about who gets what when. I mean, in the best of all possible worlds, we would all support affordable housing. What is affordable, to whom it's affordable, is always a question, and for how long it's affordable.
So let me ask you a question, because we do have two programs that, in my opinion, are terrific. The first one is public housing, and it gets a really bad rap these days, very unfairly, but public housing, in my opinion, is the gold standard. Doesn't get better than that.
Absolutely.
The federal government allocates the funding, they build the buildings, they own the land, and the tenants that live in these buildings are protected under Section 9 of the Housing Act of 1937, whatever, and they have tons of protections, they have tons of rights. The problem, though, is that the federal government has totally underfunded public housing throughout the entire country, but really it remains the gold standard. The other one that is a model that I find really, really fabulous and effective is the Mitchell-Lama. And whether it is Mitchell-Lama or limited equity co-ops, or they take different flavors, but in the end, it is the same concept where you get the equity out of the equation, so it is no longer a tool of speculation. And if you take the example of Penn South, fully occupied, 5,000 people, and it's permanently affordable. So why are we not building more Mitchell-Lama?
One, we're not building more Mitchell-Lama in certain ways because the tax code federally changed, and the ability of the developer to have a syndicate and to have tax syndication proceeds change markedly.
But do we need a developer?
Yes.
Why doesn't a union, decide, or a team of unions decide? Actually, Gary LaBarbera, not so long ago, penned an op-ed in which he says, it's time to actually bring back Mitchell-Lama.
Well, the state has been talking about bringing back Mitchell-Lama or some configuration, and you've seen that the state electeds cannot come to a conclusion about that, about 421A and 421B, about J51. We're all and have been hanging out there for 5 years almost as they attempt to come to some agreement with the unions. So I don't see that as a short-term prospect. Unions have in the past, in Penn South certainly,
Yep.
that was union supported, but even before, way before Penn South, was a gleam in anyone's eye, Electchester in Queens,
Yes.
was built by the electricians union, IBEW 3, and still remains an affordable option for many people. The Mitchell-Lama program, in part, lost support, I think, of electeds when many Mitchell-Lamas, not Penn South, but many others, opted out of the program.
Yes.
Which was not part of the original Mitchell-Lama program.
Yeah.
In the beginning, there was no opt-out, and the state legislature changed that, allowing for the opt-out, and many of the market rate area Mitchell-Lamas did just that, the latest one being Southbridge.
Yes. And that's devastating. That is
I'm
really
personally opposed to it, and I know people who live there who will wag their fingers, but I just think we built that housing.
Yeah.
We paid for that housing.
Yeah.
And you're getting a personal benefit.
Yeah.
I mean, at a minimum, if there's going to be a personal benefit, then the city should get some portion of it.
Exactly. No, exactly.
But even that won't help because we can't replace it in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also that, there is something that, I find really interesting in New York is that, there is this narrative right now of, we need to build more, which is, absolutely true. But what submarket are we targeting? There are many submarkets. We cannot say that housing is made equal. It is not. And then there's also this notion that, land is infinite. Land is not infinite. Land is very, very finite, especially in Manhattan. It's an island, short of doing a Battery Park City where, you build on the water. We're not getting more land. So I think that we need to use the land in a very judicious fashion. And, I am of the view that doing a little bit of mandating may actually be a good idea. And I think that, certainly doing disincentives for, certain type of products that qualify as housing, where I think we all agree it's not housing. The 6,000 square foot penthouse that is owned by a Saudi who has actually never visited the place. It was actually reported recently in the news. This is not housing, and this could have been housing, and it was actually done at the expense of housing, or maybe it even demolished existing housing. So how do we reconcile this idea with the fact that, in the end, we need to work with developers, and, they are the ones who will, get those projects off the ground? Where is the balance so that, we get, a good portion of, housing that will really be used by our fellow New Yorkers?
I think that's the $64,000 question. And I think it always has been. I don't believe that the housing situation we have now is the result of people with bad intentions. I just don't. I think that the price of my basic premise is that the price of building housing in New York right now is more than $300 a square foot. So if the people who are going to occupy the unit can't afford to pay for that unit's creation, then it's not going to be created unless government intervenes and closes that financial gap. And then after the financial gap for the closing, for its creation, there's the financial gap for the maintenance. I live in a co-op. There is no developer getting a profit, no. And my maintenance is $1,600 a month. That doesn't include my mortgage, just the maintenance to maintain the building. We started out long ago with the J51, that went away, and that was fine, and it should. But if $1,600 is what it takes to maintain it, plus you have the outstanding creation costs, that's never going to result in an affordable housing unit unless there is significant government intervention.
But isn't that the job of the government to do exactly that?
It is, and New York City certainly has a better record on housing and supporting it and paying for it than any other city in this country. Between NYCHA and the city supported NYCHA for decades. In the 90s, the state in their wisdom decided to do away with the commuter tax, which New York City had received from those who worked in New York City but did not live here. When that tax went away, the two biggest items that went away with it were the NYCHA subsidy that the city gave them and the TA subsidy. We basically said, you're on your own now. Live off your income. I mean, we pay for, in the budget, certain capital improvements in NYCHA. But
in the end, it is a federal mandate to fund NYCHA and to fund public housing.
Well, except that New York City always subsidized that mandate. Always.
Yeah.
Since the first development of Red Hook.
Yeah.
And without additional subsidies, the housing at NYCHA would not be able to exist on the rental levels and the subsidies they get from the federal government. And that's the big discussion now, is how much the monitor that we now have for NYCHA, because of the problems of lack of maintenance, and that is the first thing that happens with lack of income, is that maintenance is deferred.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, NYCHA is the best housing for the public that we have, along with Mitchell-Lama. The standards that we used to create those units were higher than standards that private developers were using at the time.
Yeah.
The other problem that we have with NYCHA is that no one is going to move out. So even if, and particularly in Mitchell-Lama's, even if there's a income cap, when people are over the income cap in Mitchell-Lama, they just pay an additional.
They pay an additional, which
is nothing. Because they can't.
But at the same time, it's a fair way for people to continue to stay. You know, I mean, it is incredibly disruptive to, you know, be kicked out of your home, or it creates an incentive to actually, you know, never increase your income, which, you know, for tax purposes, it's good that, you know, people increase their income. So it's sort of like, you know, this.
Well, but then every time we have a new family, we have to create a new unit.
Yes.
And that was not the original intention or idea.
Yeah.
I grew up in a NYCHA development, and when I was 9 years old, we moved. And most of the people in the development, their parents, mostly fathers, were government workers.
Yeah, yeah.
Postmen, policemen, firemen, teachers. And when their income went up enough, we moved into a Mitchell-Lama.
Yeah, there was a different path of progression. So pivoting a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the place in New York City of historic preservation. Does it have a role to play? It can be incredibly controversial at times. Are we preserving too much, not enough, or maybe all of the above at the same time?
That's another one. I mean, I know that people have very strong opinions about what should be preserved and what has been preserved and the rules for preservation. When I was at the council, most often when individual owners of individual properties felt their property was being taken from them. And for years, to be fair, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which both has the role of designating and the role of regulating, did not do the best job or make it easier for individual owners to get through the process of change, whether that was they wanted to paint their house or they wanted to change the windows. It was a difficult process for someone who was not skilled in government to traverse. They have certainly, at the commission, done a better job. Years ago, we had suggested that whenever they did these large districts in particular, that they should have kind of a guidebook of what you can and can't do, what paints you could use to paint your house, what they were looking for if you wanted new windows, so that people would have some guidance instead of throwing their hands up. They didn't adopt that at the time, but as the years have progressed, they have been able to give more guidance depending on the period and the historicity of the properties, so that people are not just flailing about. I think when we have something that we believe is desirable, let's say theaters, and I'm an avid theater goer, we provide them with huge benefits if they choose to use them as a result of the landmarking, including being able to transfer their air rights in a wider area, including being able to use their space in different ways. The owner of an individual landmark does not get that kind of.
Yes.
And most of the time, they don't have any place to transfer the air rights.
Yeah.
And I don't think we always understand that these are not necessarily wealthy people. They don't necessarily feel they get any benefit from the designation. We don't really give them any benefits for the designation.
So should there be some sort of a tax credit? I mean, there is a state tax credit that is not really. It exists, but it's not
robust,
and it's actually very, very difficult to apply for it, and it's not particularly significant. So
right.
should there be a bigger incentive?
I think so. I think that would be fair, particularly when the owner, and I saw many of them, is really opposed to it. I mean, they also put up with the fact, years and years and years ago, we designated a property, when I was at the Board of Estimate, we designated a property in Brooklyn that was the original farmhouse on this particular important piece of land. And it was the farmhouse from the early 1800s. And the two elderly sisters lived there, and they talked about the fact, which was that people came up to their windows at all hours of the day and night and took pictures of the house, tried to get pictures of the interior, knocked on their doors, and they were really suffering from the designation. We felt terrible, but I do think we need to be more cognizant of the individuals on the other side of that.
Yeah, but at the same time, there is, it's like the Albert Einstein's house in Princeton is actually a private property. It is not a museum. It is not.
I went to Princeton.
So
Yes.
And it's like, and they put a sign, this is a private property, and of course people are going to stop. Of course people, but it is also the beauty of living in such a special and historic place. So it's sort of like having this deep root to the origin of New York City, living in this original farmhouse, also must come with tremendous pride, I assume.
Well, by the time they were in their late 80s, I mean, they were the last of the family that had built this farmhouse. And they were, I cannot describe.
Like, we're done.
Well, they were undone because they couldn't live.
Yeah.
People would try to get into the house to see the interior.
So what happened to this house? Has it become a museum, or?
No, it's.
Oh, it's owned by.
When they died, the estate went to whomever, and it's still there, but they were allowed to put up fences.
Ah, here you go. So some sort of common sense mitigation that does not alter the quality of the historic property. That's interesting. And so you've been involved with the city council as when you were with the city council, you were the most important person in the city that nobody knew their name, right?
Well, I'd have to say that was the council, the head of the land use committee and the speaker.
I would argue that the director of the division of land use for the city council, especially when it was you and for 30 years, you had so much influence, so much importance. The role that you played is so formative for what the city is today. I think we don't appreciate that enough, how instrumental you were in shaping the city, or maybe avoiding some bad things that some wanted to push forward. And you had the reputation for being really tough. So is that, I mean, I can see that because I see you on the hearings. And
it was a very unique time, and I had my role, but I also had a lot of partners. And I would say the speaker at the time, Peter Vallone, who believed he had convinced Fritz Schwartz of the Charter Revision Commission to give the power of land use to the city council with the promise that we would not devolve into a member veto. And Peter supported that for the entire time he was there. There was no member veto. We voted against the wishes of some of the most powerful people in the council when we determined that was the right way to go. And I'm proud of that we were able to hold that line, that the leadership of the council was able to hold that line. But as time has gone on, the members now speak with pride of the member veto, that if one member whose district it's in is opposed to it, then the council will vote no, irrespective of the merits of the project. And I think that's problematic. That is not what was intended. I don't think it's good for the council, and I don't think it's good for the public.
so in your opinion, there should be no deference?
I think that a member should need to convince both their colleagues and staff of the rightness of their position. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were times when a member was supported, but not because of deference, but because the arguments they made with respect to the particular project made sense. And I'd be the first to support them in those cases. Or sometimes the member wanted the project and I thought the project had issues. But deference for the sake of deference, I think, is a problem, because you end up in a situation where there is no real policy, or what the policy is in one district where the council member likes this project or this developer, and then in another district, the same exact project is turned down because the council member doesn't like that developer. And I don't think the city operates at its best when it's that personalistic.
So how have you been able to remain so level-headed and so impartial? You really come across, and I mean, we know what we know today because we see you on the City Planning Commission. But we can infer that for 30 years you were probably using the same style. You are so even in your treatment of the applicants and so incredibly knowledgeable. I mean, I was watching a replay a couple of weeks ago where you went into the whole procurement system. I was like, oh my God. It was like, it's a master class every single time you watch these hearings. It's phenomenal. I'm certainly really enjoying that a great deal. How do you manage to remain so, like impartial?
Well, part of it, frankly, is I'm a New Yorker.
Exactly.
I was born here in the city.
I mean, New Yorkers are the most opinionated people.
I was born here in the city, and I consider myself an average New Yorker. I grew up, as I said, we lived in a NYCHA development, Pominoke in Queens. I lived across the street from Queens College. My parents worked in government. We moved to Rochdale Village when it was first built. I went to school in the city. I went to elementary school. Then I went to school in Manhattan. I went to Hunter High School. And I enjoyed all of the treasures that New York City gave to its residents. Libraries, parks, schools, housing, just an incredible array of activities. And I see myself now as a regular New Yorker, that if I have questions about something, it's because I'm a regular New Yorker. I don't think everybody lives in the Saudi apartment, and I don't think everybody lives in a migrant shelter. I think the vast majority of New Yorkers are in the middle. And in certain ways, it is the middle class, I think, that is being squeezed out, and that is finding it increasingly hard to maintain a foothold in the city. And that concerns me.
Do you feel that the public has a voice?
They have a voice, but whether people are listening to it is a different story. We have a plethora of public hearings in all sorts of activities, whether it's land use activities or transit authority activities and changing bus routes or bus lanes or bicycle lanes. We have a plethora of hearings, and it's not clear to me that people are really listening.
People are talking.
People are talking. But we in government, and I include myself in this, we tend to get this idea, and then we think, what a great idea. And we tend to hear most the people who agree with us that this is a great idea, and we tend to shut out of our own minds the people who are saying, what, are you kidding me?
So how can we change that?
Well, I think we should have fewer public hearings, and all of the officials who are going to have to opine on it should go to the one public hearing. I mean, I think the fact that people have to keep going and going, and they get frustrated and they get angry and they have to wait. I mean, it's somewhat better now for the public because now they can zoom in. Mm-hmm. But I also think that you have very little influence when you're zooming in.
So you need to be in the room.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that there is a difference between being on a screen and being in a room where you can see how people are responding, their expressions when you're speaking, their attentiveness to what you're saying, that you can't really see on a Zoom.
So I've been really, quite intrigued with the fact that lately we have seen a number of new groups that come and testify. We used to have the usual suspects, and they would always come, and the large historic civic organizations, RPA, MAS, and others. Lately I have seen a crop of new groups that use the same lingo, that seem to have a great deal of similarities in the language that they deliver, the same rhetoric, this pushing the same narrative, not necessarily knowing who these folks are. New organizations, that have names that sound very appealing. The Foundation for Education, and I'm having a little bit of a hard time making up of who these folks are. And there is certainly a feel that maybe this particular public engagement has been taken over, maybe not entirely, but certainly has become the place for maybe special interests disguised in different clothing, coming and pushing a certain agenda. Is it something that you concur? Do you have a different sense of the makeup of those folks who actually do attend these public hearings?
Well, I would have to say the number of people who attend public hearings at all, even virtually, is way down. And the number of the age-old suspects, as you said, like MAS or landmarks preservation, or historic districts council. We don't see them that often at city planning. We don't see a lot of new civic organizations, so to speak, who are there to speak about policy and the city. We see a lot of advocacy-oriented groups, I think, whether it's housing advocacy or affordable housing or Reinvent Albany, a group I happen to like, but they're very specific about what they're looking at. We see a number of environmental or environmental justice groups. One of the latest is the Last Mile advocacy groups. And they only come on that issue. Mm-hmm. And they don't work it into a real discussion of how we can make change that maybe doesn't go as far as you want, but that would help, that doesn't damage the fact that for the last mile, that many, many New Yorkers are getting their groceries and all of their goods via Amazon or online. How do we build that into the fabric of a growing city?
Yeah, yeah.
That's not really the discussion. The discussion from that side is that and I get it, I understand that having the last mile facility in your location is very, very problematic. But we still need to deliver.
Yeah.
I know city planning has been talking to some of the last mile people. I understand they're going to come up with some proposals. But once again, they're going to be stuck with the fact they can try and incent. But they can't make Amazon move their factory, not their factory, their warehouse facilities.
Yeah, yeah.
They can.
But there has to be a way to mandate people to do, or companies to do certain things.
We have to make, I don't think there has to, I think we have to make, this is not just a problem here in New York. This is a problem around the country.
Yeah.
And one of the problems many years ago when big box stores were first starting, and city planning came up with a proposal for big box stores. One of the things that became apparent to me, and many others, I'm not that special, was that everybody wanted to have a big box store within about 10 or 15 minutes from their location, and nobody wanted it any closer to them. And we have that issue with so many things now, whether it's last mile facilities, whether it's Ubers, that everybody wants the convenience and benefits of these things, but nobody wants to have to be the guardian of the downsides.
Yeah.
And that is the conundrum of government.
Yeah.
It is our job to try and figure out how to balance them and how to weigh them and for how long. I mean, if
like I want the supermarket, but I don't want the loading bay.
Right.
Like,
and, you know, now we're going through a different period. Those big box stores that everybody wanted are closing.
Yeah.
The category killers, which were like the Barnes & Noble. You know, 10 years ago, there was a Barnes & Noble every 20 blocks. A big one.
Yeah.
And now there's, what, 3 in Manhattan?
Yeah. Yeah, a big shift. Big shift. Absolutely.
And how we handle those kinds of shifts as the technology makes new things possible, and we're always trying to keep up with the technology, and then how to reuse those things that are becoming obsolete because the technology has allowed us to do something different.
Yeah, yeah. So to go back to one of the points that you were making about, the middle class getting squeezed, do you worry sometimes that the city is turning into the luxury city, the billionaire city?
No, probably because I have family here that are on every end of the scale. I mean, there have always been really, really wealthy people in New York. And there have also always been middle-class people, and there have been people who are struggling.
So, it's interesting because, I mean, the robber barons are a very good example of, they lived in the city, but they did play a really essential role in the city, in shaping the urban fabric of the city. And what I see today is that those billionaires who live in the city, they don't. What they do is actually they create, zombie neighborhoods. 57th Street between 5th and 6th is a very, very sad block, past 7 p.m. No one lives there. You have these gigantic towers. They're empty. The lights are off. The doorman is probably on the verge of a nervous breakdown because he has not spoken to a human being in ever. It's bad. It is really bad. And, as much as, the robber barons were, immensely wealthy and, their conduct of business was problematic and, hence their nickname, they were also very conscious of the need to be socially minded. And they did some great things. They built a train station, they built a library, they built a home that then became a museum. They have really, and even in their own homes were social elements of the city. This was where the big parties were happening, and so that there was a they were really part of the fabric. Today, who was the last person who went to Rupert Murdoch's penthouse? I mean, even he hasn't been there in 6 years. Jeff Bezos, he lives in CB5. We don't see him. He does not, contribute to, the livelihood of the neighborhood, of the district, of the city. What do they contribute? And do they take something away from the vibrancy of the city that is such that it is actually creating this gap?
I would say that the billionaire class that we have now, in part, is a response to technological changes, that they don't have to be in one location anymore. That the robber baron, whether it was the Vanderbilts or the Astors, they really needed to be here where their business was being transacted. And those days are gone. I don't understand why anybody needs, whether it's them or whether it's Oprah, or I don't understand why anybody needs, she has, a 32,000 square foot house in Montecito next to Santa Barbara. I don't understand why anybody needs a house that big. But, and I don't understand why a Saudi prince needs to have 12 residences, each of 6,000 square feet in the major cities of America. But technology allows them to be in different places and not.
But do you think they should have a say in what's going on in New York?
Do I think they should, or do I think they do?
They kind of do, because they are a market that developers are building towards and to satisfy. So
yes,
it's
no,
not
because there's only so many of them. Are they building it for them or for the aspiring classes who would like to be them? And the closest they can get is to live in a building or to buy in a building where they themselves have something. I mean, we can look at some of the things that some of the billionaires have done. I personally am not a big fan of the Koch brothers, but they have contributed mightily to hospitals in New York. And to some cultural institutions. The Kimmels have done the same. I know what's his name? Paul Allen has made a lot of contributions to cultural institutions in the city. Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah.
So there are billionaires who have added.
But those are the ones we know of. You
Correct.
know? It's. I mean, listen, we don't have to pick on billionaires.
Right.
They're actually an easy target that, you
Right.
know, it's...
But it's the concentration of wealth, of incredible wealth, is happening, and I'm not sure, personally, I have a problem with the fact that people with that much money can create an alternate government, basically. That they can decide that Bill Gates can decide to have an educational foundation that is larger, whose budget is larger than the city of New York, and he can decide where he wants to put the money instead of it going into taxes. And then we decide where the money goes.
Yeah, yeah. Or Elon Musk can decide that we're going to go and colonize Mars.
Right. Or
where there will be no government if he ever succeeds.
But, you know, you think about these billions and billionaires, and I'm not picking on them per se, but that they're not constrained by location anymore.
Yeah.
There used to be American millionaires, French millionaires, and they had to have a relationship with a city and a location and a country, and they had to fight out which policies the government was going to support. And now I don't think they need government anymore. They have their own international policies.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really interesting because the robber barons were very involved in politics, but it was really to promote and support their business. Whereas here, it is very different. It is actually not aiming to support their own business. It's not for, you know, their own personal interest or enrichment. It is almost like they see themselves as the Messiah. You know, there's something very, you know, like aspirational, but they get to decide where, you know, in a democracy, you know, this decision-making process should be shared. And, you know, in the case of Bill Gates, he decides, you know, which health program he wants to support with the World Health Organization or other educational projects. Yeah.
And the role of that kind of money in the body politic is a problem.
So do you see it in real estate and land use?
Absolutely. Anybody with that much money, elected officials run for office, and the price of entry into that business has gone up. I mean, I remember when Amanda Burden's husband ran for office, and he was one of the first people who spent $1 million on a campaign. That was considered, when I first came to work for the council, most council members spent between $10,000 and $35,000 on their races. Oh. 30 odd years ago. And now council members spend $500,000, $750,000. They spend an inordinate amount of time raising that money. And I'm not saying that they're bought and paid for, because they're not, but I am saying that much money gets you an audience that you or I, as a private citizen, if we were both just private citizens living here and called up, we probably wouldn't get. And when you have enough people who are getting that private audience, you start to feel sympathy for that position. Particularly if you're not the way the system works is you're not going to hear the other side until later on, unless the other side is represented by another interest, such as a union.
So how do we rectify this balance of power?
Well, we tried to do it by having limits on campaign contributions if you wanted to be in the public funding arena.
So if you get the matching fund program, then you have to agree to cap your campaign spending.
But we still see, I believe, bundling.
Yeah, and also, you know, as you said, it's you know, it's a career. So even if, you know, for that particular race, you're cool with, you know, limiting your campaign expenditure, you're always thinking about the next one. And for the next one, you may know that, you know, it's going to require much more, you know, and especially if anyone is thinking about Congress, you may want to speak really nicely to those people who have deep pockets.
You know, the balance of that is that that interest still only has one vote. So an elected official is always trying to balance the donor class with the voting class.
Yeah. Or hoping that the donor class, you know, provides enough that they can actually influence what, you know, the messaging will resonate with voters.
Well, there are three classes now, probably. The voting class, the donor class, and the professional class, which is those people who come up with ads and give political support and help you run your campaign and all of those activities that help you get elected.
Yeah.
And balancing them is a tough job.
Yeah.
I mean, there are those, and I've heard arguments in favor of just putting a strict cap on how much anybody can spend on
I like
an
the
election.
voucher system. I like the voucher system where, you know, each voter will have a $20 voucher and they get to allocate it to whichever candidate they like. That's a good way to.
Yeah, I think they've tried that in, I want to say Seattle.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I don't think it worked that well.
Yeah, but you know, I think that all of these are ideas that we did look at in charter revision.
Yeah.
We ended up with voting as a, and I can't think of
the ranked choice.
Ranked choice voting.
Ranked choice voting. Yeah.
Which brought in a lot of new people, although new people would come anyway, and I'm not sure that term limits, as I said, has been a boon to how the city works.
Well, we have the youngest city council ever, I think.
We do. And they're not going to be around that long. Then we get a new class.
Yeah.
And they all come in and out at the same time. So we generally have 40-something people leaving and 40 new people coming.
Yeah, which is, I mean, the onboarding is just, it's wow, it's a lot.
And there's no policy continuation. Now, I understand there were always some changes, but there was a sense that if a council had committed to something, the next council, even if people were somewhat different, would follow that. And I think those days are gone.
Yeah, which is hard because predictability is really a big component in, you know, being able to, you know, do any land use and zoning and
any long-term planning for anything,
Yeah.
whether it's schools or jails or
yeah.
And that's not really something that's been addressed at all. How do we have any kind of continuity and reliability when every 8 years we have this massive turnover, not just of the city council, but of the mayor,
Yeah, the
and
borough
of the
president and the
comptroller
controller
and all the other faces?
Yeah, no, those are actually really very, very big transitions that cause their share of shaping the land use process quite deeply.
And so we seem to be flailing, not just in the land use process, but I think in a lot of governmental functions as to where it is we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
And since we don't know where we want to go.
Which is really, it's not a good idea not to know where we want to go.
I mean, when you were talking about NYCHA, I think so much of NYCHA, as do you. I know that 1 in 8 New Yorkers lives in NYCHA.
Yeah.
I know that another 1.5 New Yorkers live in Mitchell-Lama or other co-ops that are income restricted co-ops. I mean, that's almost one, that's like 1 in 6, and the fact that mayor after mayor has allowed this resource to go downhill.
Yeah.
To not make the case for investing. Every mayor comes in and says, we need 500,000 more units. And then they come up with, in my mind, pie in the sky idea of how we're going to get there. And I keep saying, we didn't lose housing. We don't have more people than we had in 1980. We didn't lose housing by losing 500,000 at a time. We lost it in buildings that were somewhere between 4 and 10 units.
Yeah.
That is where the housing was lost. And then in the 90s, we decided we would rebuild using partnership, and the idea that, and it started during the Carter administration, that if people owned their own homes, they would not destroy neighborhoods. And so where there was once a house with 10 people, we replaced it in a house with 1 person or with 1 family. And that did repopulate significant portions of the Bronx and Brooklyn with Nehemiah houses and partnership houses, and that has been a good change. But it also meant that there was a significant number of unhoused potential.
Yeah.
During the 80s, we also saw flight of the middle class, so there was some balancing.
I mean, there's always been a flux. And
Absolutely.
I think that, recognizing that is important. I think that, the one thing I see that really concerns me is that, and this is, I think, new for New York City, the investment world is actually targeting New York, where, the REITs historically had really focused on commercial properties, and now they are really going after residential properties. And I think this is a big shift. In the past, your landlord was a human being, or it was NYCHA, or it was a Mitchell-Lama type rental.
Or the Dursts or the other real estate class.
Or like large families that had a large portfolio of properties. Blackstone is the largest owner of residential property in the world. And they have their eye on New York. They think that New York is undervalued. That really concerns me. And I think that especially the rent-regulated housing submarket is extremely vulnerable because the 2019 state legislation is very restrictive, which has its benefits. I think there are some really good things in the law, but it is also putting a lot of strain on property owners. And the vast majority of property owners are actually decent people. The slumlord is fortunately is the exception.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they cause a lot of harm. But property owners need to be able to maintain their buildings, and they need to be able to have access to capital. And what is happening today with Signature Bank and New York Community Bank Corp is really concerning me, because I see a concerted effort to short these stocks to make millions out of it, while tremendously hurting this submarket that houses, I think, between 700,000 and 1 million people, or even units. It's a lot of the affordable housing that New York has. That really scares me.
It should. I mean, we have been through, in New York, as you probably, I mean, during the 60s, we had a similar problem, the 60s and 70s, which was that it was more expensive for many small owners to maintain the building than to abandon the building. And so we saw a large amount of building abandonment in this class that we're talking about of smaller buildings that then ended up in city ownership. And then the city started a number of programs to try and get them back into the private market with more or less success, particularly in the programs that became co-ops. And we sold them to the residents for $250 a unit. Some have been very successful, but a number of them don't necessarily have the skills or the will. And when times changed and they had to start paying for water or taxes, or they were not able to negotiate that.
Yeah. And I think that I think that these properties need the help and they need the support in navigating this, because when you're a small building owner and you have a tenant that leaves, at that point you don't need to fix the leak, you need to replace a riser, and this is a big expenditure, and they need to be able to have access to capital so that they can do that, so that the units can remain in this pool of affordable, rent regulated.
And that size building, the kind of 6 to 12 units, is where moderate income, particularly immigrants, have purchased properties. And they are very vulnerable because you're right, their access to credit is limited. Their knowledge of laws and regulations are not always the best. There are organizations that have tried to help, like RSA.
Yes.
RSA has done some really good things. But as a class, this group is not as amenable to government intervention and to the regulations. And as their costs spiral, and we don't have any way to help them, I fear that we will see abandonment again.
Well, I see something more nefarious.
You think the banks will?
And what concerns me is that there was, I think that Signature is very vulnerable, and New York Community Bank Corp is very vulnerable. There was an influx of $1 billion recently, which is great. My concern is that this influx of funding is actually coming from a New York real estate developer, which means that if they repossess, they will basically get the properties pennies on the dollar. And I am concerned that, separate of this, there's a big push to deregulate the zoning framework and, the land use approach. The green fast track fairly recently, the big push for lifting the 12 FAR cap, other state bills that would deregulate land use and zoning. And I'm really concerned that all of this is part of one single, very well orchestrated maneuvering to actually do away with the rent-regulated submarkets to the benefit of hedge funds and venture capital that will get their hands on these properties. They will not have to evict anybody because it will be like, well, they defaulted on the building, so that's it. And that really concerns me.
I'm not as much of a conspiracy theorist as you are.
Touche, touche.
I think that two opposite things can be true at the same time. I think that there is a very strong market, particularly among immigrants, where owning property is critical and important. And I think that's going to continue to be strong, and that their entree into the market is at that low end. I think that the larger real estate groups don't want to be involved in buildings of that size, that it's more of a hassle.
No, but they will take the properties and they will demolish them.
I don't think that that's going to
redevelop.
happen so quickly, because I think that
But they're in it for the long run.
they may be, but as we said earlier, the long run rarely happens the way people anticipated.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
There is change and more change. And I think in land use terms, 10 years is a long horizon. And beyond that, anybody who's planning Exdel and all of their plans in the long run, what are they really, or dare I say, the Trump family. But it's not just one family. It really is, I think, 10 years is the horizon when we see these big plans, whether it was urban renewal plans, whether it is rezonings, or by the end of 10 years, they're coming back for changes and modifications, sometimes little ones, sometimes larger ones. The urban renewal that resulted in on Essex Street with the Exdel development. When that urban renewal plan was adopted in the 60s, nobody thought that there would be that Exdel building. By the 80s, when we were renewing, nobody thought Exdel building, but there we are.
Yeah.
I think that real estate and land use are always, well, I think land use is always trying to keep up with technological changes, keep up with world changes, keep up with the fact that things are happening so fast, so much faster than they used to because of those changes. And we're always trying to keep up or try and find a way to figure out how to make it work. City planning in the city of Yes says that they're trying, for economic opportunity, they're trying to keep up. But there are all of these things in the zoning resolution that no longer make sense, that they didn't do anything about because that wasn't part of their scheme.
Yeah. It's that time in the show where we get fast and curious. We are about to embark on a quick quiz, and I'm excited to have our guest, Gail Benjamin, here with us. Gail, are you willing to play with me?
Absolutely.
Terrific. So let's get ready for a quick round of questions. So here's the rule. I will start the sentence, and you will finish it.
Okay.
All right, let's go. New York zoning rules are meant to promote sound urbanism, but
But they don't always do so.
New York created the first zoning resolution in the nation in 1916, but
we're a long time from 1916. It's an ever-evolving document that's trying to keep pace with changes in our society, changes in our physical, geological situation, changes in our population.
loopholes are bad, but
I don't know what a loophole is. Most of the time I find when people say loopholes, what they really mean is some unexpected thing has happened that is permitted by the zoning.
should they be plugged?
I don't know that there is a way to, because they're an unexpected thing that occurred, I'm not sure there's a way to plug them until after the fact, which is why we see these small little changes over the past 50 years that we...
It's an iterative process.
Yes.
There's just no way around it. Community input is enshrined in the city charter, but
there's a difference between input and actual listening.
the landmark law was born of the tragic destruction of the original Penn Station, but
I think we have to look at the impact now that we have 50 years of experience and a lot more structures that are being regulated. I think we need to look at landmarks as a regulatory agency rather than just as a designation agency.
in 1916, New Yorkers were horrified about shadows cast by the Equitable Building, but
now city planning is ensconced, and that's where our offices are.
that's actually my next question. Today, the City Planning Commission is headquartered in the Equitable Building, but
the commission and the hearing room are in the basement. We have no access to light or air. And I do think that the impressions that people get from its location are that this is not an important function.
yeah, which is it's unfortunate. But I have to say that there's something. I mean, it's really karma that this hearing room, windowless in the Equitable Building, that caused the shadows and caused the creation of the zoning resolution is really, it's like, oh my God.
And there we are in the basement with the low ceilings.
Oh, this room is brutal. This room is brutal.
I've come down, I started out with public hearings in the Board of Estimate chambers, which is where Mayor Bloomberg changed into the bullpen. That used to be the Board of Estimate chambers, and the dais is still there. And that was a lovely room for the public and for us.
I don't know, some punishment.
And then I moved to the City Council, where we have beautiful chambers.
Yeah,
It's a great place for a public hearing. It's set up for that purpose.
yeah.
And now
Has
I'm
the
in
gravitas. It's,
and now I walk down the stairs to the basement.
All right, the zoning resolution is more than 2,000 pages long, but
that makes it unusable by most of the public.
yeah. Municipalities are meant to control their land use rules over the state, but
the state is still in charge. We operate within a small window, but the state is still in charge ultimately of land use practices within the city.
land use regulations should aim to balance competing interests, but
sometimes they can't. Sometimes there is a winner and a loser.
is it
Not
fair?
because of bad intentions, but sometimes that's the way it is. I think of things, one example from many, many years ago was the Jerome Park Reservoir, which is in the Bronx, basically in Riverdale. And we were going to do a major change to the reservoir because we had to put in filtration. And so there was going to be an underground filtration. And the councilwoman at the time, June Iceland, was the chair of the Land Use Committee, and she was completely opposed to it. And the community near-in was completely opposed to it and the disruption to their park, and the fact that the reservoir would no longer be a lake, it would, and basically the people who might be in favor of it are the people who wanted clean drinking water, but they're not going to show up. So everybody who testified was against it. But we voted for it because it needed to be done. So that was a case where there were losers and there were winners, but the winners were not apparent because nobody comes to speak for clean water.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes it's just unavoidable that it's rare that there's something as stark in the winners and losers as that, but occasionally there is.
Yeah, clear cut. And my final question, land use is the most political field of government, but
it's because people care. They care about their living environment, they care about their working environment, they care about their ability to do business, they care about their customer base. Everybody has a variety of cares, and that's why it's so political.
yeah, it is really, it's fascinating to see how passionate people are about land use. Everybody has an opinion.
Absolutely.
Everybody has an opinion. And you know, the fights and the name callings. And
Well, it's also because people feel like it's something they can understand, that they may not feel that they can understand the decisions about hydraulics and whether the North River treatment plant can continue.
yeah. But at the same time, it has its level of, you know, super duper complexity of, you know, it's like those 2,000 pages. And I mean, you have lawyers who dedicate their entire careers to understanding this, and
And changing it.
Yeah, changing it, or, you know, keeping themselves busy and continuing education, because it's constantly
Evolving.
iterative and evolving. And I mean, with the city of Yes, it's like, you know, they all have to go back to school.
Well, when I started, there were basically 10 residential zoning districts, R1 through R10, period.
That's it.
And now you have R7A, R7B, R7X, R7WB.
You know, it's intense. But yeah, no, it's fascinating to see how New Yorkers are really, you know, super intense about the.
Well, everybody cares about their environment.
Yeah.
And they all care about the things that they believe make up their community.
Yeah.
So when they see an exodus of small pharmacies and small businesses, and all they have now are the big CVS, and I mean, that was 10 years ago, people feel like their neighborhood lost something.
Yeah.
And they let us know.
Yeah. It's also that, you know, as you said at the beginning of the conversation, New York is really a city that is evolving. And this is something that the city welcomes, which is not the case in a number of cities in Europe. You know, cities that were not impacted by destruction during the Second World War, they're very attached to the, you know, the built environment and preserving it. The cities still evolve and they grow and they accommodate the different uses that the city sees as, you know, being important. but the physical environment doesn't change that much. Paris is a super dynamic city with lots of tech, but the housing is in those low density. It's actually low bulk, high density housing that you have in Paris. Paris is very dense. And you have, a lot of industries and, sectors of the economy that are in Paris, but the physical aspect of Paris hasn't changed significantly. The last time it changed was
in central Paris.
Yes.
I mean, I think the.
Yeah. So then the urban, the outer region changes, but it was, the urbanism of the outskirts of Paris is just, it's fascinating. We need to do a third episode.
Yes.